Hi everybody, thank you for joining us again. So this is the first topic webinar in the Dark World series. So in today's webinar, Jeremy is going to give you a sneak peek into some brand new research which we've been looking at. So we've been looking at some research to do with the different pillars of dark marketing, which really nicely match up to the 3 webinars which we're going to have within this series. So we're also going to be looking to help marketers to understand what we all really think about dark data and AI. In the resource list, which you can see in the console, you've got a link to download the slides. You will also get a copy of the recording of this webinar sent to you afterwards. And make sure to get all of your questions in before the end of the webinar and we'll get them answered. Right, over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Hopefully we'll have time for Q&A, and I won't do my usual trick of having 45 minutes of content that takes an hour and 20 to talk about. So a nice heads up to Paul Ellis, who seems to have discovered that you can download all of these slides already from the resources. You can go and see what we're about to talk about. And there's some really good stuff that we've got today. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that. Some of you, I know, like to focus on this stuff. Some of you are multitasking and doing a few things at the same time. So I'm going to try and mix it up, so not just explain what's on the slide all the time, but also I'll try and point to the slides as well that you might want to just flick off your screen if you're doing other things and either screenshot or download something. So we're going to try and squeeze this in about 45 minutes, a whole bunch of slides and some brand new research that we've done as well. As many of you know, I spend an awful lot of time at conferences. And this week is particularly crazy. We've got an awful lot of conferences this week. We had TFM this week as well. We've got Festival of Marketing the week after, and then Summit, Watson Summit the week after that. And we see an awful lot of marketing keynotes. And then you walk around these places like TFM Expo yesterday, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of stands from startups through to big enterprise companies. And everybody's saying the same thing. And it's a lot like when you look at these slides of Scott Brinker, people like that have the millions of logos on. You look at those companies and they all say the same things. And it's really, really hard to know who to trust. And it's also hard to get a sense of the state of the industry. So that's why rather than just take third-party research and read other people's stuff, I'm a big fan of Gartner and Forrester. As many of you know, I've talked about them a lot in the past. What I also like to do, and I have the privilege of being able to do this at IBM, we have big research teams and agencies that we work with when we can go and ask everybody firsthand. So we've got some new research. You guys are going to be the first to hear about it. It's not even been published yet. We only just got the preliminary reports back. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights. And basically what that's going to do, I hope, is give you some insights that you've not seen before. You're welcome to steal the stats and use them for yourself. I would encourage you to weigh them up as well, you know, just to see, like, just because we say it and we found it from our research doesn't mean that it's true. So what does that mean for your business and for your company? So we'll get into that in a little bit. And also, as I fly through these slides, I say this a couple of times, but let me just kind of emphasize this point, right? Marketers are notorious for making any data and any number mean anything that they want. We see it all the time in politics. We see it in decks. I've used quotes in the past from people like Churchill and Twain, you know, these things like, you know, please get your facts first and then distort them as you please, or the only stats you can trust are the ones you falsified yourself. We could make a number mean anything. And as I looked through the research, it actually took a lot to dig into the research to figure out what it was actually saying. Because I could have twisted some of those numbers out of their true context. You know, we've asked a series of about 40 questions, and when you look at them in the context, you know what people are saying. Although on their own, it'd be quite easy to try and twist some of that to make it look like, on the one hand, all marketers are in control. They've got a beautiful single view of a customer. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They're investing in the right things, and their team's happy. But exactly the same piece of research is also showing people are terrified and massively uncertain. Nobody knows what to invest in, and no one's got a strategy in place for this world that is changing much faster than any of us think. So I wanted to open up just with a couple of thoughts. First of all, from the guy who was the ex-CEO of Netscape, lovely guy, Jim Barksdale. He said, if we have data, let's look at the data. Before we have our opinions, let's go with mine. And he's kind of indicative of a lot of the old school management consultants as well, people that go in with these data-driven arguments and discussions. This idea of if I give you enough data, because data doesn't require emotion, there's no agenda, there's no opinion attached to it, it's not going to have an ulterior motive. The data says what the data says. Therefore, you assume that you can walk into a boardroom with that number and you can win over anybody's argument. That's kind of how we've looked at things in the past. What we know, and what you guys know from probably listening to many of these series, I know that many of you on the line have listened to us right from the beginning of the first couple of series that we did going back a year. We know that 3/4 of executives make decisions with their hearts. Even when they've got all the data, people still make major strategic directions about the future of their companies with their hearts. And the only reason I keep banging that drum, and I'm constantly using that quote, is because it's still a problem that we see every day, and it's still a problem that technology people, and certainly people within agencies, make the mistake of thinking, if I just go in the data, I'm going to win people over. Data beats emotions. If you're without data, you're just another person with an opinion. But we know that we need to go in with emotional stories as well. So we're going to try and tell a few of those. I'm going to try and look at some of the stories behind the data, and we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A because hopefully many of you won't agree. Many of you will have different opinions and you have different viewpoints from the perspectives that you have with the type of customers you've got, the demographics that you go out to might be different to ours. So that's the sort of debate that these webinars are really useful for getting into. So as Juliet said, this is a dark series. We've talked about dark social a lot. We're going to touch on that very, very briefly today, not a whole lot. Dark Martech's going to be a big one that's coming up soon about investing in technology stacks and how do you know exactly which one to look at. But for today, we're looking at dark data. So let me just set the scene with 3 slides before I kind of give more context that's going to maybe take it into things that maybe you're less familiar with. Dark data is really this idea of all the things that you cannot see. We'll look at Watson shortly, but one of the things that Watson is most powerful at, really one of the biggest differentiators for Watson as this production AI for enterprise, the only one of its kind in the world, is that Watson, he can process, and I use the term he very loosely, can process unstructured data and try and find meaning in it. He does that by using natural language processing. But basically what he's doing is he's looking at data that isn't joined up, it's not categorized, and it's assumed at the moment that of all of that data, all the data in the world, about 90% has been created in the last 12 months. Amount of data in the world at the moment because of connected devices and because of IoT and the web growing at the rate that it is. It's probably going to double about every 18 months at the moment. Web's data is growing at the rate of Moore's law. So we can't keep up. So we're struggling a lot with that to try and figure out what do we do with all the data that we've got. And people are going out and trying to acquire new customers instead of making sense of the data that they've got. So the big stat here is not that 80% of all the data in the world is unstructured. It's that only 0.5% of it's been analyzed. And if you actually look at that data, if you look at the background to it, Cisco and Forrester have talked about this quite a lot. They claim that somewhere around about 35, 36% of all that unstructured data is actually useful. So we're going to have a look at that, about what that might mean for you guys and how you might actually want to make sense of that unstructured data. Because we often throw those phrases around dark data and unstructured data quite loosely. And the purpose of today is to dig into that a lot more. I apologize for the slight the typos, the formatting on the slide there. You've got the PDFs that you can download from the resource area. If you want to steal any of these slides, if you want to use them, go back and read them later on. Go and do that and have a look. We've got the full deck over there. But really all this is saying is that it's not actually that complicated. We all think we've got big data problems. In fact, Andrew McAfee on a previous slide said the whole world is a big data problem. It's not actually that hard. People think it's complicated. It's really only a couple of things. It's really just combining all the purchase data in the world with everything from the social web, everything from connected products, and that includes, IoT, connected toothbrushes, Tesla cars. Someone from Tesla yesterday was telling me that 2 days ago there's 100 million lines of code in the average Tesla car now. All of that data is being combined, and then you've got your customer and your prospect data. So when you combine all of that together, you have what we call big data. And when you speak to the scientists, they call it the 4 or the 5 Vs. Now, the 4 Vs is the strict one. The 5 Vs is value. Value is really something that we should find in all the data anyway. So it's supposed to be volume, velocity, variety, veracity. So we mentioned about how fast the world of data is doubling. Every 18 months, about 66% year on year. Lots of different forms of data coming from many different sources. We'll look at that shortly as well. We've got about 50 million marketing events every second. So you talk about velocity. This is a conversation about speed and how marketers need to keep up. And I know that's one of the things that we struggle with a lot, especially around automation. We'll see what the research says about that shortly. And then when you look at veracity, that's where business people generally, not just marketers, but business people really struggle because they don't ask the question enough, is this data accurate? What is it actually saying? What are the stories behind the data, and how can I fix that and find the anomalies within it? And as many of you know, Watson Marketing and Watson Customer Engagement, a lot of the products we've got, that's really the purpose of us selling the technology stack that we have. It's just to try and find those anomalies and just to try and do things faster. And we try and automate as many of those processes as we can. So we're going to debate the nuances of that later on. I assure you this is in no way a sales pitch. You won't find me throwing lots of product slides at you. So we're going to kind of dig into what this really means as a marketer. So first place we want to go for something like this is Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge. And I did what any smart person would do when I'm trying to learn about a new thing. I'm going to go and look at what does Wikipedia say. Now, the official description for unstructured data is on your screen right now. It's talking about unstructured data is basically just information that either does not have a predefined data model or is not organized in a predefined manner. It's usually very text-heavy, but it can also contain a ton of data, including dates, numbers, facts, and there's going to be tons of irregularities within that make it incredibly difficult for most programs, certainly most software, to understand. So this is why we get into the world of AI and Watson, where when we talk about machine learning and all that kind of stuff, really all we're talking about is natural language processing. How can we understand complicated sentences and natural language and tone and sarcasm and humor and whatever cultural and local references you've got in order to try and make sense of that. And you want to try and find some sort of meaningful information in those very, very noisy data sets. And you can see the stat underneath there. In 98, Merrill Lynch were the first people to claim that around all of this, 80 to 90% is usually unstructured. And most of that is what lives within your business. Most of the data that you have is unstructured, and you need to try and make sense of all of that. So we're talking about Word documents, PDFs, and other text files, books, letters, written documents, and stuff. So how do you deal with it? Well, we're going to look at a few techniques. This isn't going to be a technical session today. This is an overview. We're going to dig into this a little bit later on. But when you're dealing with unstructured data, there's only a few things that you can do. Traditional marketing software, marketing clouds, a lot of the very basic automation tools, certainly a lot of the products that I saw yesterday at TFM, hundreds and hundreds of companies that are trying to help you build relationships with your customers faster and automate email and social and the web and help you build apps and bots and stuff. The biggest problem is trying to understand this unstructured data, which is incredibly difficult, and there's very, very few AIs in the world able to do it. A lot of it requires a huge data set. Like I said, Watson, at this stage anyway, we're about 12 to 18 months of anything that anyone else in the world has got. But that's obviously going to change. It always does. Other people will develop an AI. They will train it over time, and it will get smarter and smarter, and we'll look at levels of confidence and things like that later on. In fact, I don't know if you guys saw this in the news. Just a couple of days ago, I saw it in the news. I read it on Bloomberg. This is the job of the future. And I got a question about this on a panel yesterday. They were talking about, will AI destroy jobs? Now, obviously, we've got a very sensitive reaction to that. We don't want to talk about AI destroying anything. In fact, we talk about AI as if it's augmented intelligence. It's really just an intelligent assistant that's going to help you do your job faster. That's really all Watson is. It's just trying to help you do your job faster. It's like having the perfect assistant next to you all the time. But, of course, role descriptions are going to change. No doubt about that. Building dashboards, maybe running campaigns, running certain types of analytics, running things like you may have seen me demo the Watson Marketing Assistant. That's able to do some tasks now in 12 minutes that agencies might take 30 days to do. So, of course, that's going to change people's jobs. And this job that I read about in Bloomberg was about AI trainers. Go and Google it if you haven't heard it already. Fascinating article. It was talking about how students are getting paid now between 3 and 15 cents per task. And they'll get a bunch of tasks to do each day. And basically, they're populating AIs with training data. Then they're trying to train that with the things that the AI responds to say yes or no, you understood, you made the right decision, or you didn't. And students are getting paid to train AIs because there's not enough people to do it. Now, they may only be getting, $30, $40 a day, somewhere between $10 and $15 an hour maybe, just for doing a few pieces. But at the moment, that industry is about $100 million a year. And the claims are that just by the end of next year, that industry is going to be worth over $5 billion. If I was sat where you guys are right now thinking about building a startup or a practice within my agency, or looking at partnering with IBM in some way with a new service that you can offer, you might want to seriously consider that, having AI trainers that can just help to get these machine learning technologies up to speed faster. So that's going to be huge going forward. So let's have a look at what that means and what unstructured data actually is. Well, I've taken a few slides from some of our analytics teams at IBM. We have incredibly smart analytics people. As you know, we put about $6 billion a year into research, and we've got 1,000 research scientists that dig into a lot of this stuff across IoT and healthcare, education, commerce, marketing, and supply chain. And a lot of the things that they're using our technology to do is to try and make sense of this unstructured data. So this is a very simple visualization of what I mean when I say that. We're talking about everything from GPS on maps to understanding emails and social media. And by social media, I mean anything that's across the social web, and certainly things that have got open APIs, like the interest graph from Twitter, the social graph from Facebook, the economic graph from LinkedIn. You may be looking at 500 million networks, blogs, forums, reviews, all the stuff that you might be surfacing on a command center for customer service. And then what about your PDFs and your images and your audio and your videos and all the customer service conversations that you had? When you phone at the bank and it says this conversation may be recorded for quality control purposes, that might also be a way of having an AI be able to train that and understand the nuances in how to improve customer service. In fact, if you're interested, I'm interviewing the COO of Vodafone on stage at Watson Summit on the 10th of October in London. It's going to be one of the best events that I've done this year. Very much looking forward to that. And we're going to talk a lot about how to reduce the costs of things like customer service by trying to use bots to automate an understanding that it's taking and extracting from unstructured data. So some pretty sexy stuff going on there. So what does that mean? Well, I didn't want to just kind of simplify it and leave it there, so I thought I'd break it down. And this is kind of an ugly slide, and I'm going to apologize for one thing that's on the slide. It says Google+, not my favorite thing in the world, which kind of dates this slide a little bit. But I liked it just as I was dropping in something in at the last minute into this deck last night, because it measures structured and unstructured. But what this slide also does is it looks at what's human-generated and machine-generated. And I think that's something that we don't look at often enough, and especially in light of people like Procter & Gamble, who earlier this year cancelled $100 million from their digital marketing spend because they said it wasn't working. And they noticed no difference whatsoever when they cancelled it. So now they're in a process to try and reduce their digital marketing spend annually by $2.2 billion. Now, marketers would get worried of thinking, this is the death of whatever type of marketing. But actually all they've done is say that they want to cut out the fake traffic or the fake video views or the fake clicks and reach that actually hold no value to them whatsoever. And a lot of that is machine generated. It's something that we don't look at often enough when we dig into what the data is actually saying. Who are the real people we're engaging with? So half of my advertising isn't working, don't know which half. P&G is looking at the half that is working, and it's saying the other half at the moment, they've got a strong suspicion a lot of that is machine generated, maybe bots or fake. So in the structured side, something like that, you may be looking at web metrics from logs, product purchases, sales records, process control measures. That's all your internal stuff, maybe 80% of your structured data that lives within your own business. But then you're looking at things like, GPS on tweets, the time of tweets, updates, postings, somewhere between 5 and 10,000 tweets a second at the moment. And the average lifespan of a tweet now is probably about less than 5 minutes, which is why marketers need to keep up and be super fast instead of just responding to things within minutes or hours or the end of the day. But that's all structured data. We can see that. It's categorized. We can put it in order. A machine can make sense of that very, very easily. But what about that free language within an email or a text, audio transcripts? Whenever you watch TED Talks, you see the transcripts underneath. How do you understand that? Voicemails, corporate video, reviews, emails, letters, and then you can see at the bottom the human-generated stuff down there around external data sources of unstructured data. We're looking at comments and video reviews, Pinterest images, surveillance video, etc., etc. So there's a huge amount of stuff that we need to make sense of. Now, I wanted to give you a quick example just of what this might look like in real life, just to try and bring this to life. And I love this. I spoke about it yesterday. TED is one of my favorite things in the world. I watch a TED Talk every day. Very geeky. I like getting lost in TED Talks and ending up watching things that I didn't expect. But there's a project we've been doing with them, TED and IBM Watson. It started out of APAC, I believe. I think it was an Australian project originally. Basically what we've done is we've looked at TED as a vast amount of unstructured data, which is what it is. And Chris Anderson and his team know that they've got some hugely valuable insights from TED. You all know it's the best place you can go to spend 18 minutes. No, I'm going to keep it at that. It's 18 minutes incredibly well spent. And you could see some incredibly smart stuff to learn and to get better at your job and look at personally and professionally how you develop and all that kind of stuff. But it's incredibly difficult to understand, especially when you've got 20, 30, 40,000 TED Talks. So what we did was feed all of those TED Talks, every single talk from Global, from TEDx, from the main TED conference. We fed them all into Watson. He watched them all. He listened to them all. He watched the videos. He looked at the slides and all the analytics that were on them. He looked at all the data that was embedded within that video, and he started to make sense of it. So now we're in a place where we could actually ask Watson, what does that mean? If I'm looking at doing a startup and I'm looking at building an innovation team, how do I do that? Do I train people for innovation? Do I want naturally talented people? Do I get startup guys? Do I get enterprise consultants? You might have 1,000 questions when you're launching a new business. We could just ask Watson, and based upon the 38,000 TED Talks, he would give you an answer. And then he may even say, and here's the 3 talks you should watch to go and make up your own mind. Now, that's a perfect case of AI taking vast amounts of unstructured data and trying to do something beautiful with it to create a lot of value that people can get insights from incredibly quickly. And we're rolling this out across healthcare. I'm sure you've heard me talk about our stuff with oncology, trying to look at highly personalized strains of cancer. You're looking at Crohn's and Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, mental illness. You know, these very, very complicated topics that you've got to try and find some meaning and some nuances that starts to tie that data together. We're looking at weather data and how that drives behavior and how that drives emotions. And then the stuff that we talk about today, what does that mean for commerce and for marketing and actually growing our own businesses, getting people to like and to click on our own stuff? So, what's the problem? Well, I just have 3 slides just to emphasize the problem, as if you're not overwhelmed with this growth already and the fact that the world is changing incredibly fast. I suspect that's why you signed up to these webinars as well, to try and get some insights. So we really appreciate that. A slide that we've put on a lot of these decks, Juliet talk about it a lot when we go out presenting and doing events externally, is this idea of single view of a customer. It still remains the #1 priority of CEOs to understand a single view of their customer, online, offline, across every single area. Incredibly difficult to do, very complicated technologically to do that. Some people are trying to build their own tech stacks. That's what the Dark Martech webinar is going to do in a couple of weeks' time. But this is very, very difficult because you take that single view and you're pulling in lots and lots of data sources, lots of very disparate sources, and then often you find out that data doesn't talk to each other. It's hashtagged, it's unstructured, you've got your internal and external, you've got your machine-generated, you've got your human-generated data, and then you've got this very, very fast-moving data from connected devices and from the social web and stuff. You've got to make sense of that super quick. So what does that mean in real terms as part of the problem? Well, IDC had a look at this, and they looked at how much time do marketers actually spend on trying to understand this stuff. And I love this slide. It's a couple of years old, but it just shows by far the amount of time that we waste. On average, for the average analyst, is 17 hours a week just trying to search and gather information. That's where we spend most of our time. And for the average analyst, obviously this is an incredibly simplified statistic just to try and illustrate a point. Time wasted is about 30,000 for the average amount of time that people are spending on this stuff that they could be spending doing much better things. So that starts to make compelling cases for things like automation and how you can get systems to help you to do your job faster and things that, you shouldn't be wasting all of these hours each week doing some of this stuff. You should be building better content and responding to customers faster and building more beautiful things to help people like you more, fall in love with your brand, improve customer experience, and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we have this thing called Universal Behavior Exchange. I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail, really. You can go and Google it, have a look on our site, go and search Watson Customer Engagement UBX, Universal Behavior Exchange. This is a differentiator and only something I wanted to flag up just as an evangelist at Watson, because this is one of the things that makes IBM completely unique. We're one of the only. Somebody said that we are the only, although I can't validate that, but there's very few. Let's say there's a handful in the world of less than 5 companies where you can take any data set from anywhere in the world and plug it together in a way that it can make sense with all of these different sources, put it in one place, get a single view. That doesn't have to be enterprise. That can be a very cheap solution as well. It could just be something that starts off with as simple as an email product. But this is what our Universal Behavior Exchange is. It's basically taking data sources from absolutely anywhere and helping to plug them all together. So, how are we doing? Are we okay? Let's have a look at what some of the research says. Let's have a look at some of these numbers. And I'm going to fly through this quite fast. You'll see that the data is going to make sense of itself, but we wanted to give you a heads up before we actually go and publish these reports, because there's going to be exec summaries, and it's probably going to be a 60-page report that starts to look at some of this data when we went out to ask people. First of all, it's worth noting this is about 1,000 people. Most of those people are from mid-sized companies, not from enterprise companies. About 55% of all the people we asked spend probably about $20,000 a month on marketing technology as a whole, so less than $250,000, and most of them spent less than $150,000. So a lot of them are trying to make sense of all of this stuff with very, very limited budgets, split almost evenly between practitioners, senior managers, and CMOs. And the thing I like most about this report is not only is it split between B2B and B2C, but 70% of the data has been pulled from Europe. So we know that it's local data that makes sense to us, and it's not one of those horrendous reports that's just got all the North American stuff that doesn't feel relevant to us. So let's have a quick look at some of the numbers. What does this say? Well, the one thing that this slide talks to me about is marketers seem like they're very happy. Marketing met our top business goal for last year. Yes, 42%. Fantastic. We should all pat ourselves on the back. That's not my experience of marketers. It's not my experience of speaking to customers and prospects. It's certainly not my experience of going to conferences and seeing what people are struggling with. So this either tells me that we're complacent as a marketing industry, or it tells me that maybe we've got an ego, that we want to tell everyone that we're doing the right thing. And here's the wonderful things we're doing. I'm very proud. Everything's fantastic. I've got it all together. Whereas maybe that's not entirely the case. And this is why you've got to look into the data like this to try and see what it's really saying. My personal opinion, we've got no idea what's going to happen next, no idea. Futurist, we're trying to throw out all these predictions. No one has the faintest idea. We're all kind of slightly scared and uncertain about the future. So, this is showing that there's an element of marketers clinging on to this idea that, but we kind of think we're okay. And I even asked a room full of CMOs a couple of weeks ago, put your hands up if anybody's scared and fearful for their jobs. And it was based upon PwC research. It showed that actually 4 out of 5 executives, when you ask them truthfully in anonymous surveys, 4 out of 5 are completely overwhelmed. And in this particular room, when it's face-to-face, nobody put their hands up. Everyone's like, no, I'm cool. My job's fine, perfectly happy. So you see a disconnect between what people say and what people actually think. And obviously we know from the US elections and Brexit and things like that, that people don't always do what they say, and the data doesn't always tell a truthful story. Now, the story with this slide, very quickly, there's only 2 things that stand out for me here. These are the technical barriers that you face when you're trying to build a joined-up view of the customer journey. Dark social, right at the bottom, 2%. The growing prevalence of dark social. Do you see that as a barrier when trying to build a joined-up view of a customer journey? 2% yes. That tells you that 98% don't see that as a problem. Now, I see that as a freaking huge problem when the vast majority of consumer conversations are now taking place in messaging apps, and they're invisible because it's private and we can't hack their phones. So how do you see what customers are saying when it's all in a private messaging app, and as a brand or an agency, you've not got access to that? I see that as a major problem when marketers don't think that's an issue. So that's the first thing. We could talk about that later on, but just slightly up there, you see data privacy issues. Now, GDPR is a huge thing for us at IBM. We registered just over 8,000 patents last year, and 50% of them were around data privacy and GDPR and looking at how we can protect our customers' data, how we can prove at any one time where their data lives, in which country and which data center. We're completely transparent about that at any one time. Very few companies are able to do that. But this chart shows that 15% of marketers see that as a technical barrier, which also shows that 85% don't. Now, that might be ignorance. It may be just a lack of understanding, but we all know that we need to spend a huge amount of time learning more about things like GDPR, especially across Europe. Now, how likely are you to include artificial intelligence into your marketing strategy over the next 12 to 18 months? 32% say very unlikely. A few people are going to, so that's positive. We're seeing there 29% are likely to include AI. Now, this is a fascinating slide that we could actually spend a long time on. We're not going to right now. But when you think to the hype cycles, and I presented them a lot, you can look on previous decks for the Gartner Digital Marketing Hype Cycle. When it looks at AI in marketing, you'll see that the AI in marketing little yellow triangle is right at the beginning of that hype cycle. And what Gartner says when they put it there at that far left, it means that less than 3% of the industry are investing in or looking at AI. It's showing a complete lack of maturity to AI in marketing. Now, what we're seeing from our research is the complete opposite. So this is quite a big deal for me. It's also very encouraging because while Gartner says that less than 3% of the industry is looking at AI, what our data is showing us is that 29% of marketers in Europe are looking at AI, not over the next 5 to 10 years, like Gartner's saying, but over the next 12 to 18 months. So that shows a huge discrepancy between those two data sets. What it also shows you is that whilst at the moment you may have a competitive advantage to try and get a start on your competitors with looking at AI and chatbots and understanding this data, what you're also going to see is that people are going to catch up incredibly fast. Now let's fly through some of these slides because I'd love to give you a few examples. Marketing strategy over the next 18 months there. Again, you can see how it compares to the leaders and the mainstream. And don't forget, you can download all of these slides from the resource area and have a look and dig into them, and we'll send you some updates later on as soon as this research is readily available. How do you rate your company's ability to act on insights derived from customer data? Very poor, a lot of people are saying, but very, very few feel like they have an excellent view. So it kind of contradicts what we said originally, doesn't it? We've got these very happy marketers that feel like they've got it held together, that, we're kind of happy with where things are going and we're confident, but yet really, you don't have any ability to act on the insights derived from your customer data. How can you be happy with that? So we need to poke, either our customers, our bosses, the brands that we work for about, really, are you sure? And we need to ask more questions of the data that we've got. How well does your organization leverage customer data for each of the following? So you can see there 46%. Right at the bottom, automating tasks required to create personalized experiences. I've emphasized an awful lot about the amount of data that you need to make sense of. No human can ever do that. And yet 46% of the industry have no plans to automate tasks to create personalized experiences. That's a huge problem. You need to fix it. How exactly are you going to do that and keep up when you've got, it doesn't even matter if it's hundreds of thousands. If you've just got hundreds of customers, that's still too much for most humans to keep up with. You need to have systems. Ideally, you need a cognitive system that can learn on its own. But you need to have systems in place that can start to automate all of this stuff. And then you start seeing things here like, demographic data. We'll look at this just in a second. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. 59% say that they're using demographic data, but yet 78% say they have no plans to use data sourced from a third-party API. And that could be any type of loyalty data from somewhere else. Now, the reason I see that as a problem, that's a huge disconnect, because you may have a very small customer set with some very small and useful demographics inside it. There's going to be some useful stuff in that, some good data. The problem is, you need to validate that to figure out if it's accurate, and often you need to run third-party data on top of it. And what we're seeing is that the vast majority of marketers are not doing that at all. And I suspect that's why there's a lot of marketers making very bad decisions. I find it slightly embarrassing, but also a little bit laughable that 17% of the people that we asked said we have no strategy whatsoever for integrating some of this together across our organization. So you can see the data is telling all kinds of interesting stories. Do you have visibility personally across all of it? No visibility whatsoever. Some have total visibility, but most people are incredibly limited. We're all still living in silos. And again, we need to break those down. So we're at 25 to, so I've got about 10 minutes, and I just want to fly through a couple of examples really quick. And I'm going to do these quite fast, simply because I know that you've got access to the slides to go and have a look at afterwards, so you can read them. But bear with me as I scoot through these, because I wanted to give two quick examples that were complete opposites, one in healthcare and one in commerce, just to look like how do you actually make sense of unstructured data. You know, we all see these wonderful case studies, and I've spoken a lot about things like North Face and 1-800-Flowers and Red Bull and all the things. We don't often look at exactly what's happening, so I thought, let's do that. Let's have a look at something very complicated like healthcare. So what can you mine from unstructured data? Well, you could see from the bits we've looked at in the past, you can see the various different types, the different varieties of data. We're looking for keywords and tags. We're looking for categories, different taxonomies in order to try and figure out patterns within this data. We're looking at sentiment, what's it saying, the tone, the mood, what do people really mean. We're looking for things like genres. So if we look at an actual data set, this is the best way to visualize what it might look like in a record. Now, this is healthcare. This can be just as much across commerce within CRM, something across marketing. Structured data looks like that. Name of the patient, date of birth, admitted, tick, 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 box, 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 yes, no. It's very, very simple to start running analytics and all of that stuff. But when you have the form that somebody fills in or the voice that they say over the phone or they call in, and the patient came in with chest pain and shortness of breath and headaches and smokes this and family disease, and you need to understand that. And if you're going to use a system to do that, the system needs to be able to learn to understand that at scale, because as we mentioned, we haven't got the time for humans to always do this and to try and triage that data as we get it through. So you can read this slide in your leisure, but basically what it's saying is that you've got data analytics is giving you the who, the what, the where, and the when of a subject. That's what's happening. But what we're actually looking for is the why and the how. Why are these things happening? Why is this happening? Now, what might happen in the past is you look at things that are very transactional. So this is the way that, say, a predictive engine might look at something. And this is worth pointing out because a lot of people at the moment frustrates the life out of me. I'm very passionate about it, as you can tell, because I'm the evangelist for Watson. People pretend they've got an AI when they don't. They often have a very smart predictive engine, but it's not an AI because it doesn't understand, doesn't reason, it doesn't learn, and it can't interact properly. It's just trying to take triggers. So what you're seeing here is two completely unrelated statements. In May 1898, Portugal celebrated the 400th anniversary of this explorer's arrival in India. Well, what does that mean? Well, we can pick out the keywords, look at the taxonomy there, and then the system could then go off and try and find a match, and it may find a match for something from the social web. In May, Gary arrived in India after he celebrated his anniversary in Portugal. And a system like this is going to pick out all of those matches, and it may be very weak evidence, but it's going to come up the answer is Gary. Right? Now, we know that that's horribly wrong, but that's how most systems analyze unstructured content. What they should actually do is something more like this. So they would look at exactly the same thing. They look at celebration. And then they're going to run analytics up to about 10 million records a second in order to try and find the nuances within that. So it's going to look at the 400th anniversary from 1898. It's going to think back 400 years, just like Watson did when we built him for Jeopardy for the game show to try and understand questions like this. And it's going to see the date. Okay, this means 27th of May, 1498. Arrived in, what does that mean? Exactly where does that go? Well, that means it's landed in. Is it India? Well, this particular piece of content, 27th of May, 1498, Vasco da Gama landed in the Kapad Beach, which is just outside of India. And he may see in the geolocation that that's the beach. He knows it's in India, therefore it's an explorer. Ta-da! Vasco da Gama is the answer. Sorry, Gary, it's not you after all. And most systems, most marketing systems, most healthcare systems can't figure that out. It's a very, very basic, simple use case, but that's one of the things that makes Watson incredibly special. And if I needed to emphasize this anymore, just have a look at that chart in the bottom left, bottom right. Because what we're talking about and we're getting into the weeds a little bit now, it's confidence scores. And this is why marketers go wrong, because they don't have high enough degrees of confidence. And the errors that they look at, when you're looking at those predictors based upon structured versus unstructured, my first example with Gary is structured data, and you can see there. Look at the percentage encounters, look at the accuracy level, incredibly low. Yet look at how that compares to the encounters across the unstructured data. We're seeing the accuracy up there, 95%. We're seeing a completely different taxonomy of the way that the system's actually looking at this. Let me show you another example really quick. This is just something that's across commerce. This is a gorgeous product. I'm going to be talking about this in a lot more detail at Watson Summit, so I encourage you all to get your bums down to London. On the 10th of October, it's going to be completely free. There's going to be about 1,000 of us in the room. We've got the astronaut, Chris Hadfield's going to be doing the opening keynote. I'm talking a bit later about engagement. I'm going to be interviewing the guy that invented this product. It's called MetroPulse. And really what it's doing is all that stuff that we've just been talking about, taking unstructured data from loads of different data sources, variety of sources across the web, third-party data, IoT, internal, social, and piecing it all together. And what this product is able to do, and this isn't a pitch, I just want to give you a quick example of this that we're doing for a very large CPG brand. You can start to look at, well, what's the shelf life of a product? What's the average lifetime value of that customer? When are they most likely to churn? What are they going to do next month? But then more than that, how do they interact with the city? And where do they shop? And based on GPS, where do they go? And how close is that ice cream shop to that school? And when the weather changes, which flavors do people buy the most of? And even though we may have gut feelings about this stuff, this gives you the hardcore data based upon aggregating all of that unstructured data, putting it all together. This is incredibly sexy stuff. This is only a couple of months old. We're going to be showcasing this at Summit. And in one particular use case, I drilled down in New York and I looked at a little mom and pop shop just on the corner of 23rd. And what it showed that it was flagging up that there was an opportunity in this particular shop. There's a franchise, you see there, 7-Eleven. And this is what the data showed in this example. So we're going to talk about at the conference. Their average daily sales in one particular category was $738. But we showed that if they changed the format of their shop, their point of sale and their discount structure, their average sales could be $3,824 based upon putting all of this data together in a more structured way and giving that single view. That's an insane difference. That's not just marginal gains. That's just revolutionizing sales and the way that commerce happens. And we do that by trying to pull together that unstructured data. Now, obviously, this is the power of Watson, trying to process all that in real time. So I'm going to give you two examples about where to finish, and then I'm going to pick on one of my favorite people that's been signed up to most of these webinars, Ali. Hopefully Ali Dancing-Reynolds is on the phone at the moment from Brass, and she's listening in because we're going to pick on her agency to have Watson analyze everything that they've done, just as an example of how to understand the unstructured data of what they've said. So first of all, where do you start? Well, I wanted to reiterate just with a slide to begin with that we've mentioned in the past, but it's a good slide, so it's worth throwing up again because it just simplifies stuff. The 5 W's: who, what, why, where, and when. Who are your customers? What are they saying? Why did they say these things? Where did those conversations take place and when? And if I was you right now, not knowing where to start, looking to build a dashboard, even if you're starting off with whiteboards and post-it notes, just put this on a board and start populating it with the information of where all of this stuff comes from. I promise you it'll be worthwhile. In fact, there's a gorgeous philosophy that Spotify have. They're famous for having these tribes and squads and having this very agile working practices. And they just break everything down very quickly. They just break it down into data, insights, beliefs, and bets. And it's a really nice way of working. It's a case study that they actually launched a couple of years ago. It's called Design Sprints. And the Spotify that you know today that you see on your phone, it used to just have different activities, but now it has moods within it as well. And you can start exploring different playlists through things like dinner or sleep or workouts. But Spotify had to understand all of that unstructured data in order to try and place their bets on where they thought the data was. So in one particular instance, they were looking at the opportunities. And the opportunities were things like, the data was saying activity playlists are getting more popular. Okay, well, what does that mean of the insights? What's the data telling us? Well, it looks like there's a shift in behavior in the way that people are actually using the app. So, okay, we validated that. What else does Spotify do? They're going to go back and look at the beliefs. A set of activities is a better entry point to A music service. Okay, so we get people more engaged. So what about the bets? Well, what if we bet on building custom features into key activities? And the way that that built out is they started looking at the problem. They were looking at things like, well, what's the data saying? Most casual runners find running tiresome and boring. What do the insights say? Music serves a very functional purpose for runners. It motivates you if it's dull. Okay, well, do we believe that? What's the belief actually behind from Spotify's point of view? We believe we can improve the running experience. Okay, so what should we bet on? We should build a dedicated feature for fun and motivation. And if you go in your Spotify app now, you'll see that's why the product is structured in the way that it is. And they did some very smart things. They also asked these 6 questions at the end. I've used these 6 questions before. The 6 questions you need to ask yourself. What was the source? How well does this represent the population? Does it include outliers that skew the data? What assumptions do we have behind it? And have we got any bias? Why do we decide on a certain approach to process the data? And what value are these results going to provide to people? But more importantly, why? These are some really solid slides. I encourage you to go and lock yourself in a dark room afterwards and go and try and process some of this stuff and see what it applies to your business. So Watson can help with this. You've heard me talk about it before. We have this hugely secure platform, very trusted by most of the world's banks and airlines. 97% of the world payment systems go through IBM technology at some point. This is what the Watson platform looks like if I was to draw it in the back of a napkin. The bit we're talking to you about today is customer engagement in the middle of that. And we have these industry specializations. We just mentioned a case study from healthcare there. You want to go and find out more about this stuff before I pick on Ali's company, Brass, just go to ibm.com/Watson. Lots of these APIs that help you make sense of that unstructured data will be there in a demo environment. You can play with them, mess with them, give them to your developers, and figure out in a Blue Mix marketplace how you might even start going and using some of this stuff yourself. It's not even expensive. A lot of this stuff is pay and play. Now, you may need our help to try and integrate with services and things. Of course, we'd love to talk to you about that. But you just want to go and dig around ibm.com/Watson first. And if you want to see the marketing piece, just go /marketing to the end of that, and it's going to show you the technology that we have to help you do that a little bit faster for your customers. So let me show you something cool very quick. This is something I like to call the mood graph. This is my particular mood graph. This is what Watson thinks that I am based upon everything that I've ever tweeted. And I have a lot of tweets. I keep it quite commercial. I'm a little bit playful on Twitter, but not too much. And Watson's understood. This is what I'm likely to do. This is what I'm unlikely to do. Here's my personality profile. And these are the emotional triggers which somebody engaging with me would want to do that. But also I might want to look at this and think, do I need to change my Twitter strategy for the way that I talk? Because maybe I'm not emotional enough, or I'm too open, or maybe I'm certainly not helping others anywhere near enough. I don't have enough time to go and engage and reply as much as I used to. So we ran this on Ali's company. We ran this on Brass Agency. You can see in the URL at the top of your page there, gwen-systemu.mybluemix.net. Juliet's also put the link so that you can see that in the resources at the side of the webinar to go and run this on your own company. And I'm being playful, right? I'm having some fun, but you can see the personality that Watson's understood from looking at Brass. They are opinionated and explosive, adventurous, and they're very eager to experience new things. I'm quite sure that is true. You're authority challenging, prefer to challenge authority in traditional values, enjoy a fast-paced, busy schedule with many activities, unconcerned with tradition or taking pleasure in life. Not sure if that's true. Maybe we need to train Watson a little bit. Maybe the content strategy from Brass needs to train a little bit. We need to look at the data to see why. And you care more about making your own path than following what others have done. They're doing some pioneering work up there. Good people. You can check them out. And this is what we've seen. We actually looked into the data from Brass, and this is where it starts getting interesting, because all that unstructured data, now we can see the level of confidence we spoke about in brackets, and we can see emotionality, 16%. We can see, let's look at the lower single figures. Let's look at the high 90s. That's usually where the good stuff is. 87% trusted. So that's pretty high. Could be a little bit higher. 10% modest. Not particularly fiery, not that prone to worry, and certainly not stressed or self-conscious. But what might be interesting is if you look at the bottom of that, you're seeing a very trusted agency putting out some comms that people believe on Twitter. Now, when people trust you, you might want to give them more emotional content. As a creative agency, you want to tell more emotional stories. That's how people connect. And we can see down here that those needs think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, love is down to 26%. I would suggest that that could be a lot higher. So they might want to look at that. So go and check out Gwen's System U. Go and look at the personality insights. Tweet us. We'd love to see if you agree with that, if it's actually shown anything back that was useful. And honestly, go and lock yourself in a dark room. Go and try and make sense of some of this stuff, because I know it's very heavy and it's moving very fast. And if there's a book that you would look at, I'd recommend this one by Nate Silver if you've not read it already. Signal and the Noise. He talks about how we have too much of technology and not enough of ourselves. And it's the best book that puts it in a language that even my mum can understand about how to make sense of this stuff, because many predictions fail, but some don't. Thanks very much, everyone. Let me hand back to Julia, and let's see if we have any questions that have been thrown through.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. Yeah, we've got a few questions which have come through now. So we've actually got one from Ali, so I think we should start with that.
Of course we do. Is she upset?
No, she actually put the question in before you popped the breath into their personality insight, but we'll start with her one. So,
okay.
Data from dark social. Do you think this will continue to be such a big issue? Do you think more of these platforms will offer the data, probably anonymized, in the future? So Facebook currently offer data anonymized to select partners. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're going to lock down more?
I don't actually. I think Facebook, I don't spend a huge amount of time with Facebook and certainly can't speak for them. My opinion of listening to what they've said and spending time with their people and listening to conferences and stuff is that they've got a vested interest in doing that. They're a gorgeous company. Obviously, Zuckerberg's got a vision to try and make the world more open and connected, but they want to get people to click more ads. And the way that they're going to do that is by making sense of that unstructured data that has to be anonymized. And they're going to be able to match that to third-party data from maybe loyalty cards, or looking at something like Axiom or, dunnhumby and Nielsen data, things like that. But where Ali says, do I think this will be such a big issue? I'm not so sure, because in marketing, we always have cycles. And if you would have asked us 5 years ago, we would have been debating things around F-commerce and, social commerce, and looking at, well, are people really going to, dump their e-commerce shops and put everything on Facebook? And the consensus back then was, yes, absolutely, because that's where people are spending all their time on Facebook, and we've absolutely seen that not to be true. So hopefully what's going to happen is brands will find a very respectful way of engaging with customers once they realize that they're not in control anymore, and they'll provide such good experiences, hopefully using some of our technology, to want customers to want to connect with them on a messaging app. Because then if that experience is so good, maybe you wouldn't mind connecting to KLM to do one-click changes for your flights in Facebook Messenger. At the moment, there's not very much of that going on, but I think once that starts to get better, I think it will be less of an issue. Thanks for the question, Ali.
Great, thanks for that, Jeremy. Right, so we've got a couple of questions here around GDPR, if you're prepared for one of those. So, hi Jeremy, do you think GDPR will have an impact on the ability to analyse dark data? So as individuals may become more reluctant to share personal data going forward?
That's a great question, Rich, and I probably didn't emphasise that enough on the call. We're obviously hugely respectful of GDPR over here, just because we have so many enterprise customers and so many banks and telcos that we deal with. But I think one of the biggest opportunities that we have within unstructured data and dark data is the fact that GDPR and things around personal privacy don't apply anywhere near as much, because really what we're doing a lot of the time is we're working on public data sets, or especially when you're looking at things like the social web, things like personality insights, we can gain a huge amount of information from mining that data that is anonymous. And there's a lovely saying that we've used in the past from Brad Voyek at Uber. They've, ethics aside, they've had a very good track record of understanding a lot from unstructured, anonymous data. And he said you don't need to know everything about everyone, you just need to know a few things about a lot of people. And the good thing about dark data is that we're analyzing stuff that's not personal. So I think that's the big opportunity when it's, such a tricky issue to get around in the short term. The problem is, by the way, very few people can do it well. And without me trying to bang my Watson drum too much, there's very, very few companies that are able to process that at scale.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for that, Jeremy. So, on to the next one. I think we've got a few more minutes. We've probably got time for one or two more, so let's crack on here.
Cool.
So, do you think we will see established companies change their values use analysis like this to reinvent themselves with the goal of engaging with a younger audience who some argue are more interested in a company's purpose?
Well, that is a great question, Mr. Callum Lyons. I think you need to write a book on that. That sounds like a book that I would read. It's one of the things that executives seem to be talking to us a lot about at the moment. In fact, I had exactly that conversation with Gary Adey this morning. He's the COO of Vodafone, and he was talking about the values that they've got over there. Now, you look at someone like Vodafone, and they're the most valuable brand in the UK. They need to make a lot of money. They kind of want to do two things. They want to do good customer service and save a ton of money, and they want to make a lot of money as well. But the thing that I was impressed most with about what Gary was talking about was that he said, in order to try and engage customers going forward, and in order certainly to try and engage employees, especially younger audiences, he said, I'm actually more interested in focusing on the values of the people inside the company. Because he said, if we've got happy employees, that means happy customers. If we've got happy customers, they're going to spend more money and make more profits. So we got into a little bit of a debate. We're going to cover it a little bit at Watson Summit. I did a post about it on LinkedIn, and it was called The 6 Rules for Building a Happy Company. But I think you're exactly right, and you need to keep banging that drum because not enough companies are changing their values. People are still clinging on to the way of the past of trying to get people to click more ads and sell more stuff, thinking that they're in control, whereas now, most of us on the line understand that, customers are in control now, and they go to dark places. They go into messaging apps and the brands can't see them anymore. So if a brand doesn't add value, it's going to lose them. And we're going to have a lot of Kodak and Blockbuster type issues over the next couple of years with brands that don't react fast enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think that's all we have got time for today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on the line. And if you missed anything, then we'll be sending around one of the recordings afterwards.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again. Bye-bye.